Something has to give with the Baltimore Ravens coaching staff. We talk about what that might be, still recapping that Cleveland loss, and more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back. We are here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen of the day. Free and available, as always, on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. Our listeners get 100% free boost to their franchises when using the promo code LOCKED on in all caps in the game store. And we're back. It is Taco Tuesday. We have Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown back with us to talk about just what is going on in Baltimore right now with this Ravens team. They obviously lose 13-3 to Cleveland in week 15. And Spencer, I know there's a lot of blame that can go around in that loss, but it just feels like with the coaching staff, something almost has to give. And I'm not necessarily talking about a firing. It feels like it's probably far too late in the year anyway to do something like that. I felt like this was the absolute cutoff, even if there was one. And obviously John Harbaugh stood up there on Monday and backed his guy, said that they are a team. But in terms of just like play calling, execution wise, and just maybe what John Harbaugh had to say, where are you right now with this coaching staff?
It seems like they can't get out of their own way. And the way that they have built this football team and what their philosophies are and what they preach time over time of possession, shortening the game, controlling the ball, controlling the clock, control. And especially coming off of a game against Pittsburgh where you do have your backup quarterback, you do run the ball well, and they stayed out of their own way. They didn't go for it on fourth down. They didn't put Tyler Huntley in situations where he had to have these like high leverage plays. They tried their best not to burden themselves in that sense. And then in this game, they come out, they run counter, run gap in the first half. I think that Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins had about 13 gap and counter carries for well over 100 yards, somewhere around 140 yards, averaging nearly 10 yards a clip. And then even considering a couple other things, such as the end of the first half, they end up getting into field goal range, missing the field goal, of course, which it just to preface, it feels like no matter what they did, they weren't going to win this game. They just missed field goals, blocked field goals, interceptions, turnovers, fumbles. It was just a soup du jour. I like a lot like the Buffalo Bills game from the divisional round in 2021. And I digress back into it that they deviate off of their path. They get into situational conundrums that aren't a conundrum, where they think, should we go for it? Or should we try to trick the defense? Or should we do X, Y, or Z? And, they start, I think a nice microcosm is the end of the first half. They start with well over a minute left. They have 3 timeouts and they don't use them. They start getting into this weird rhythm, and the Isaiah Likely play happens where he's kind of trying to fight a little bit, but goes out of bounds, and then the clock's still running. And they don't call a timeout still, and they just start getting in this frantic behavior. And that actually didn't end up biting them. They make a nice throw to Mark Andrews. Tyler Huntley runs the ball. They get into field goal range. I think Tucker missed that one. I believe that was the one that was missed. But it just feels like they're always trying to outsmart everyone and their opponents. But when you have a backup quarterback in and a good defense and you're running the ball well, what is your formula? Keep pounding the ball, keep pounding the rock, keep going back to it. And it just doesn't make sense because that's what they preach. Without Lamar Jackson in, you would think that is the easiest answer, to do your best to not overcomplicate the game and get into that fast, that where the clock is just moving and draining. And then for Harbaugh to come and have his press conference and, why weren't you running the ball in the fourth quarter? He says, well, we were down 2 possessions. There's not enough time. I do resonate with that a touch, but when you're throwing the ball with a limited passer who you're calling plays and throwing the ball 5 yards downfield, 6 yards downfield, time after time, the only reason the clock isn't running is if it's an incompletion. And then at that point, like, what's the difference between throwing the ball for 4 yards and running the ball for 4 yards, or, running the ball for 7 yards, throwing the ball for 5, whatever it is? If you're not going to attack downfield at all, or even try to, or feel confident to, then what's the difference between running the ball? And you're able to gash them. I think they had 6 runs over 10 yards, barely able to generate anything through the air. They get into weird sequences where they go run a mesh concept. There's 3 guys wide open. There's a little bit of pressure. Pat Ricard kind of lets up some inside pressure, ends up getting a holding call that negates an offsides or whatever the penalty was in the Browns. And you see Tyler Huntley just roll out and just can't even get the ball to Devin Duvernay, who's wide open. They're kind of moving at the same pace and just can't even give him a layup. So I think that people were fed up and frustrated. It was a Saturday game. It's the holidays. Everybody is pissed off about their weekend, and a lot of irritated fans in this one. I think you have a right to be, but at the end of the day, they do go 2-1 with, their backup quarterback, more or less. Huntley playing most of the Broncos game. They're trying to play in these 13-point games. And if nothing else, this game needs to be a swift smack, a burning smack to the face of John Harbaugh, to the sense of drink your own poison, like get high off your own supply. Whatever what you're preaching is not what you're doing. And it's how they've constructed themselves with Lamar Jackson, hopefully coming back. Maybe he misses this one. Adam Schefter tweeted out quite some time ago, the intention is for him to play against Atlanta on Christmas Eve. He will make a couple plays for you, whereas Tyler Huntley can't. Run the ball 40 times. You can run the ball with 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Browns didn't have Jadeveon Clowney, are a historically bad run defense. They are arguably the worst run defense since 2000. They were showing you that they were. They were acting like it. And still, and there comes a point in the game where, and I get it, you want to throw the ball, and I think, honestly, if put in the same situation as Roman and Harbaugh, I might have leaned into throwing the ball a little bit more, down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. But it gets to the point where it's these like 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 4s, and you're still just throwing the ball. It's like, take a little pressure off of Huntley. Take a little pressure off. Hand the ball off. And on top of it, you're just not using your playmakers. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, like those are the guys that have been making plays for you. Justice Hill has been making a couple plays whenever he gets an opportunity. And I even get maybe, okay, you don't want to override J.K. Dobbins. Clearly he's not still right. As incredible as he has been able to perform between the tackles and, moving the chains and generating some pretty nice runs. Clearly, I mean, he can't even, his knee doesn't have a full range of motion. It's evident to anyone who watches. So I get maybe not feeding Dobbins as much late, and you are ultimately probably going to play in this game against the Bengals for the division. You want to continue kind of increasing his workload and things like that, but go to Hill, go to Edwards, go to Andrews, go to Likely, go to those guys. Demarcus Robinson, James Prochet. I mean, Robinson's made some good plays for the Ravens, and in this one, he just kind of was shaky. He was letting the ball hang out a little bit, is lining up in some weird spots, but it's just, with the game in the balance, you get into these like 2nd and 4, 3rd and 4, 4th and 4 situations, and you're just not letting your playmakers go to work. Instead, you're letting putting all the pressure on your backup quarterback, who's a limited thrower, and James Prochet. Like they're dialing up plays for James Prochet, who has had a tough go of things a little bit. You're just putting these inexperienced players in really high leverage situations with games on the line, and you don't have to. And maybe the logic, and I just feel like this is too sophisticated. Maybe they could say, well, someone has to step up in the receiver room eventually, or else we're not going to win anyway. But I feel like that's too complex of a thought to have mid-game. It's just the inability to realize when they're starting to get the urges to try and outsmart the opponent or get aggressive and go for it on 4th down. And it lets control slip away from them. So they're not self-scouting effectively enough. They don't have limitations in place or something in place to understand, like, how are you not riding your run game as much as you can and calling games that in that sense, in that situation. If you run the ball, if time is of the essence, like, wouldn't you rather end up saying, well, we ran the ball, maybe we could have thrown it a couple more times, but we made sure to get our playmakers the ball and let those backs keep working who got us to the position to be in the game still. Instead, they didn't, and then you have to go second guess the other way. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is the smartest thing to do, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a team that they showed it was working the entire game. And I understand also, like, I get they're down 2 possessions in the fourth quarter. You want to maybe air it out a bit more, but they weren't down, by 14. They were down by 10. And I also think that the way that it was going, you're right. Like a 4-yard run versus a 4-yard completion is the same thing. Time still runs off the clock. And I think they had a much better chance of breaking a run for a longer gain than they did passing. And they put themselves with these passes. You know, Tyler Huntley throws an incompletion. They're now in 2nd and 10. It's already putting him in a hole. Then you're in 3rd. It all goes that way. So it was just baffling to see them go so far away from a player in J.K. Dobbins who averaged nearly 10 yards a carry. And it wasn't like he did it on 2 carries. He was on 13 carries. He rushed for 125 yards. And I agree with you, Spencer, where that you're not going to try to ride him out and give him 25 carries in his 2nd game back from this thing he's been working through. He'll get more carries as time goes on, but then you have another guy in Gus Edwards who averaged almost 8 yards a carry. So you can go to him as well. So it's frustrating for a lot of people. I know there's just a lot of talk about how this team, that they're a run first team. That's their identity. And that's fine. Like it's fine that they are that, but sometimes it feels like they do get a little too cute. But coming up in our second segment, we'll be diving into what John Harbaugh did have to say during his press conference, backing Greg Roman, talking about the injury situation and a bit more there. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a lot to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is sponsored by Ultimate Football GM, and I'm super excited to tell you about Ultimate Football GM. They're our new partner and our sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game. And if you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your own football franchise, your dream can come true. And this game is definitely for you. You can manage every strategic aspect of your team and play through the season and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency and even the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. And you have all this in the challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can also play on the go as you want and when you want to. And we have a little Locked On League going, so there's some competition in there. And it's super fun. You really can do a lot of different things. You have a ton of options that you can craft your team with. And if you want that competition, you know, listeners of this show, you can do that as well with your friends. Locked On Ravens listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On again in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. And this episode is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B, or even test drive a new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We are back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens with Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. I am Kevin Ostrak, your host. And Spencer, Lamar Jackson has been a very big topic of conversation, but I think the bigger one for Monday was John Harbaugh getting up and talking to the media. He had a lot of things to say. He was asked about potential play calling shifts. He was asked about the injuries, and a lot of fans seemed to not like what he had to say. Did you have any problem with what he had to say, or was this more like, it's a typical, Monday afternoon John Harbaugh press conference?
Typical Monday afternoon John Harbaugh press conference. I don't know what people expect. He is going to protect his own. If he's not going to make a firing, he's not going to lay anyone under the bus. It's unprofessional to do so. Just because it's a football team doesn't mean it's not a business and an organization, and that there are, courtesies and protocols in place ultimately. So it's just, he said he's going to say the same thing. We put all this stock into player interviews and press conferences. They train them what to say. Glory be to God. I love my teammates did all the work, or, it's, we got to work harder, get back to work. It's just the same thing time after time. So if you're looking for solace in his comments, then I don't know what to tell you. It's ultimately just not that serious. So,
yeah, there's a lot, and it's all coach speak, player speak. Like we see it all the time. But I think what people are frustrated with almost is I see the word accountability thrown out a lot on Twitter about, the coaches with the lack of accountability that they have, and people thinking that is the case. I mean, would you like to see John Harbaugh take more accountability in these? It seemed like he did and said, we probably should have run the ball more, et cetera, et cetera. But people do want to see that accountability factor. And I think it's a big thing to take accountability. So where are you with John Harbaugh's, I guess, accountability levels this year?
It's really the only accountability you can take is the only accountability is getting fired or like reducing someone's snaps or anything like that. So I don't know what accountability means in that sense. He says it's on us. He says all the cliche things. So accountability is a very strange word, I suppose, to some, because to me, it just means saying we have to be better. We will try our best. We will be better on all of those things. It's not good enough. It's on me as the head coach, all of those kinds of things. Those are the things he echoes time and time again. It's programmed in as a response. Does it make the Ravens not lose a game if he gets a little more vulnerable and starts blaming someone else to make, himself feel better? What do you want him to do in terms of accountability? Does he need to get a tattoo or something or change his clothes? I don't know what accountability means in that sense. He stands up there before the press and says, we have to be better. We have to do a better job. It comes down to us. We have to work harder. I'm not sure what is accountability in that sense ultimately.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that you can look to in that sense, but in terms of what has to give for this coaching staff, Spencer, it just feels like something has to change. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about a firing here, just like what they do on a game-to-game basis, maybe in-game adjustments, pure execution from a coaching staff perspective, obviously play calling a big part in that too. Do the Ravens or do the coaching staff, so do you feel like they have to take their blinders off to something and just something then will spark, or does it go a bit deeper than that for you?
I think that they just get it. Again, they just get in their own way and they don't drink their own poison. They don't buy into their own philosophy in key moments. And the inability to recognize that you need to do everything you can to prevent Tyler Huntley from being what determines that football game, it was just blind to do so. But at the end of the day, again, I just don't think the Ravens were up to the task of the Browns. Calais Campbell goes down, Marcus Peters goes down, the Browns start running the ball. If they were to go run the ball or throw the ball and score, it felt like the Browns had been moving the ball pretty well. Of course, it's, hindsight, and it didn't actually happen, so it's easy for me to say, but they were working. They had the Ravens, bending a little bit and were able to get in position. The Browns also did miss 2 field goals in the fourth quarter that make that game even uglier. So, they were moving the ball. They got into scoring range, were playing conservatively, doing the things that the Ravens should have done, and they had some of the same miscues. So, Cade York is not Justin Tucker, but he's a really accurate kicker. And just a weird game. And again, it just kind of feels like that Buffalo game, but moving forward for them against the Falcons and Steelers and Bengals to close out the year, this has to be a lesson. It has to be a smack in the face that you need to stick to your game plan. You don't have the talent at receiver right now at quarterback. If Lamar Jackson comes back, he's probably not going to feel 100%. He has a knee sprain. It's not the end of the world, but probably not going to be quite as dynamic as he usually is. So got to follow the KISS approach. Keep it simple, stud. Run the football, play defense, tighten up in the red zone defensively, and that's your path to being a tough out. They have a good offensive line. They have talented running backs. So that is what it is right now. And, they could stand to do some other things, but this game needs to serve as a last lesson moving into the most crucial part of the season, that you got to run the ball through the gates of hell. That's what's working for you. Buy into it. Then you'll have Lamar Jackson, who will make a couple more plays than Tyler Huntley will. So that's what it's going to come down to. And it just feels like this team is just, when the weather gets cold, they start to fold a little bit. They can't score. They struggle in the red zone. And it feels like it's been that way over the last couple of years, especially at this time of the year late. So what's it going to be? How are you going to step up? Are you going to buy into your identity and what you've built this team to be? And, guys, and you see J.K. Dobbins after the game, after he had such a great game and gritty performance, saying, that's on me. I've got to be able to hit that for a touchdown. And it still does stink. And I think that's why there isn't some big sweeping accountability or whatever, because they are still dealing with the ramifications of those injuries. They have a wide open lane, and J.K. Dobbins, who is miraculously playing so well on one leg, but he just, has a wide open ability to at least get down to the 5 or something and can't go do it. So, maybe if he's what they drafted him to be, not because he isn't injured, it's not his fault, but the vision got broken up a little bit and then they still deviate from it. You have to despite all odds, be what you buy into, be what you organize and constructed this team to be.
Yeah, certainly have to buy into that identity right now if you're the Ravens, especially with how much success they've had there. But let's talk a bit about that Cleveland game from a non-run game perspective, where you have Tyler Huntley, definitely a rough game for Tyler Huntley. I know we've talked about kind of his skill set and what he brings to the table. We've talked about, I guess, the lack of deep ball accuracy for him so far throughout his career. The defense, I thought, played fine. 13 points is usually enough to win you a football game, but the offense has been struggling so much. So with Tyler Huntley and with the defense, obviously two very different spectrums there. What were your thoughts of them in this game?
Yeah, I thought the Ravens defense did an admirable job. The Browns definitely wanted to go attack Kyle Hamilton, who I think stood up to the task in many ways, and they were able to really thwart the Browns' run game. The Browns have done a good job over the last couple of years with Kevin Stefanski working crossers and kind of some zone beaters that will fall through. So I think they disguised those well and been able to hit on a few of them. But Calais Campbell goes down, weren't able to really contain the run game late. Nick Chubb starts to roll after finally, clicking a little bit, and Calais Campbell goes down. So thought that their defensive effort was solid. Really, the only blunder of the game was on Patrick Queen, I would say. It was super bad, where he just kind of vacated his zone. He thought he knew that Donovan Peoples-Jones was going to continue to the flat, so he wanted to go rally with Marlon Humphrey and left his assignment. And you can see that he was, twisted with himself after, because he left his zone and might have been able to stick, make that game a little closer. Who knows? But again, it just felt like no matter what they did, the Browns are going to win this one. They didn't have the firepower. The Browns had a good enough game plan to move the ball a bit. Tyler Huntley couldn't get it done, but defensively, yeah, some nice things. Saw some solid effort up front from Brent Urban and Justin Madubuike and some of those guys to really make a mess. And it was just a quiet game, it felt like, for the Browns offense and defensively. There weren't, a ton of huge plays going on. They were able to get some chunks, like I said, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, go rumble, and a couple missed tackles. But it was a solid defensive game plan that felt like, kept them in position to be in the game. And in order for them to win, they would have had to really shut the Browns out, and they couldn't quite do that, which is a tall task. So it was a weird game, but felt like defensively it was pretty quiet.
Yeah, I mean, you're the money downs guy. 5 of 15 for the Browns on third down, 2 of 2 on fourth. Did you see anything there?
Yeah, fourth down. I mean, the Browns are really good short yardage. They have a good offensive line. They bring Jacoby Brissett in for one, and they're lucky that the Browns didn't maybe try some more dynamic plays in those instances. But I thought Justin Houston played well in this one. We saw Jason Pierre-Paul continue to work and go through. Dafe Owe made a couple plays here and there. So I thought they just did a nice job making a mess, but they did let up those 2 short yardage, and the Browns are really good in those situations. So it was tough.
Yeah, well, coming up in our final segment, we'll be diving into a bit more defensive conversation about Calais Campbell and Marcus Peters and what those 2 absences could potentially do for the Ravens. AFC North talk. We'll talk a bit about that Falcons game in Week 16 too. So be sure to stay tuned. So a ton to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. And again, we have now surpassed the first week of the fantasy football playoffs. We are now on to round 2 for most people. But if you want a different twist on fantasy, be sure to check out PrizePicks. And it's super easy to use. You can have a ton of current entries, and how it works. Just pick 2 to 5 players. And if they will go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times the money on an entry. There's no competing against other people, so 0 projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. Is that easy? They have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget the promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We are back, rounding out Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, in the spirit of our second segment defensive conversation, unfortunately, Baltimore did lose 2 of their big guys on defense, in Calais Campbell, literally a big guy, and then Marcus Peters. Both those guys, there have been reports about both could have some absences. Marcus Peters may be a short one. Calais Campbell also could miss some time here. How big are those absences, and which one, if both had to miss, let's say 2 or 3 weeks, maybe the rest of the regular season, which one would be more felt?
Really tough to pick between those 2, because what Calais Campbell does and the amount of double teams that he commands, and allows one-on-ones for some of the other guys in the interior, and what he does in the run game is paramount to the Ravens not losing control of games. But at the same time, Marcus Peters, I mean, their cornerback room just has no depth. Peters has gotten picked on a little bit at times, hasn't quite looked like himself, but things have quieted down somewhat in the last couple of weeks. So just because of depth, I would have to go with Marcus Peters would be a bigger loss there. And you already have Fuller out for the year. And, Brandon Stevens is the next man up. After that, I guess, Jalen Armour-Davis, Ardarius Washington, those guys. So they built this team around their secondary and their cornerbacks. They built it back to front. And when the back goes down, the team can start generating big plays through the air, then the Ravens are in no man's land and can't do what they want to do and control the game and play in those low-scoring affairs. And if you make them have to score points right now and they don't have the confident pass game to be able to move the ball down the field, and God forbid there's a team that can handle their gap scheme, then they're in trouble. So I'm going to go with Marcus Peters there.
Yeah, it's disaster. I mean, the way their cornerback room is set up, I mean, I think Jalen Armour-Davis is done for the season. I think John Harbaugh classified that as season ending. So I know they're a Worley now. He's not ready. So Peters had beat Brandon Stevens and Pepe Williams and Ardarius Washington. So like Marlon Humphrey is like the top disaster. Like you cannot lose Marlon Humphrey for the Ravens. But despite the inconsistency of Marcus Peters this year, that's still a big loss even for a little bit of time. And obviously Calais Campbell's played great this year, but kind of sticking with corner spend. So I put out a poll on Twitter yesterday, and I don't know how it crossed my mind, but it did. Do you feel like with the Ravens, this is kind of like off-season / draft talk. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins last week, but Baltimore doesn't have a second-round pick, so there are a lot of questions about, well, how are they going to spend their premier first-round pick this year? Would you rather have them trade / sign for a wide receiver and then draft a corner in the first round, or would you rather have them trade / sign for a corner and then pick that wide out in the first round?
It's a tough one. Depends on who it is. If it can possibly be a DeAndre Hopkins or a Keenan Allen, then I'm going to go in that route. But if it's more of another kind of guy that isn't going to go be an ISO receiver that wins and can take the pressure off of their quarterback or take the pressure off of the rest of their offense, then I'm gonna go draft one, a Jackson Smith and Jigba, or maybe a Quentin Johnson out of TCU. So to me, the route is to go make that investment, and I think the Ravens do a good job of drafting, developing cornerbacks in the early rounds. There's a couple really good ones that they could be in position, such as Cam Smith from USC, Joey Porter Jr., Penn State. One of them probably goes pretty high, but I digress. That I think that's the better route ultimately, and it feels like the whirling dervish of young receivers might not be the route to go unless you bring in a veteran as well. So it's time for a paradigm shift in Baltimore, but they're still going to want big, long press corners. There's some of those in the draft. Go draft one of them. Go find DeAndre Hopkins, who you sniffed around a couple years ago. Ravens usually, when they sniff around someone, end up with them at some point later if it's possible. And due to Arizona's situation, that could be a little cap casualty or perhaps a trade. So I would love to go see a veteran receiver that understands how to win against zone coverage, which takes more than athleticism. And I think that's the best route.
Yeah, man, I think DeAndre Hopkins and Joey Porter Jr. would be a dream for a lot of people right now if that was able to come to fruition for him. But we still do have regular season football. Season is not over yet, despite, I know, some skies falling mentality from some people here. Week 16, I think, becomes a lot more important now, even though it is a non-conference game. I think just for the mental of this team and honestly for the fan base at this point, Baltimore has to go out there and get a win. And I think we've talked about they haven't had that dominant win really all season. The New Orleans game, you can classify as that wire to wire. You could even talk about the Jets game in week 1 if you wanted to. But I mean, does this game kind of ratchet up in importance for you because of this loss to Cleveland in week 15?
Definitely. This win would take a lot of pressure off of them. And maybe you can start to work in weeks 17 and 18, a little bit more of trying to figure out what you are going to do in the pass game. It might give you a little bit more wiggle room into experimenting in the pass game, seeing if there is some sort of miraculous possibility to figure out that James Prochet can do X, Y, or Z, or someone else can do X, Y, or Z. But if you win, you're pretty much in this week. And then you're talking about divisional games, and they already beat both of those teams. Sweeping ain't easy, especially when you're not a super complete balanced team. And the Bengals are obviously a super tough out and a really talented team that is rolling, arguably the best team in the NFL right now. So That looks like a long shot, but the Steelers would love to ruin your season and would love to go get that win. They are still fighting for that 500 record for Mike Tomlin. You think he doesn't care about that? You're crazy. So divisional games can go either way. Sweeping's tough. Got to go get it done against the Falcons. A rookie quarterback playing in his first road game. They don't have two of their top three receiving threats. They like to run the ball. You like to stop the run. So Calais Campbell out. Got to figure something else out up front and force some turnovers, play a clean sheet offensively, run the ball through the gates of hell and get it done. And you're in the playoffs. You can hang your hat on that at least, while this probably isn't their season or their time to go on a Super Bowl run, but would kind of alleviate some of the groans and moans as opposed to having to go play Pittsburgh on New Year's Day and have the intensity of that game and everything in that sense. Feels like the Ravens, following such a disappointing loss, could really go for a nice warm chocolate chip cookie of figuring out a win against a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, it'd be nice. And I have two more for you, Spencer. The last one is a hard-hitting one. I'll save that one for the end. But this AFC North, it seems like you're right. It's going to come down to Week 18 against the Bengals. How confident are you in that game right now, based off everything you've seen?
Well, it's in Cincy, so it gives you a little tick in that direction. While it's to be determined how long Trey Hendrickson is out, Sam Hubbard as well. The Bengals do have DJ Reader back, who is arguably the best run-stopping nose tackle in the NFL, and they're rolling, man. They're a different team than when the Ravens saw them. They have figured it out offensively. Zach Taylor has opened up just a light little arsenal in order to manufacture some touches to Jamar Chase, get him in some better positions, and got a good run game. Their offensive line's been better on the ground game as well. And Joe Burrow's a winner, man. I think he's 18-3 against the spread in his career. So if you want to bet against Joe Burrow, it's not a super good idea, especially against a Ravens team that already beat them, is on the road, and might not have some of their key contributors.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And that game goes a long way. I feel like this team is probably making the playoffs. There'd have to be an epic, historic collapse in order for them not to. But based off of everything, Spencer, who would you want to see in the playoffs at this point? Which teams do you think Baltimore has a legit chance to beat right now in terms of what they are as a team offensively, defensively, and what you've seen from the other AFC contenders so far?
Talking of the contenders, I guess that would put you up against the Bills, up against the Chiefs, and up against the Bengals. And with that being said, I think Buffalo. I think Buffalo, they played really well, really tight. They didn't have Rashad Bateman already. You already saw them once. You do ultimately, if you play them, you're probably going to have to go up into the tundra up there, into that deep bone-chilling cold. The Ravens have already struggled there a bit, but I think that Stephon Diggs, kind of a one-man band up there in terms of what they have talent and skill-wise. I think that Andy Reid's a little bit more dangerous of a play caller. I think the Bengals are a little bit more well-rounded team that you're going to have to play in that scenario probably 2 times in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and that would be the third time on the year. So I think I'm looking at the Buffalo Bills, and they don't have Von Miller. I don't know. Tough. Probably whoever you can run the ball against, maybe that's the Chiefs. So Chiefs or Bills. Think the Bengals are built to beat the Ravens at this point in the year.
Would you want to see Miami?
Depends on where that is. I guess that would probably have to be, I don't know. I think that would be 2 wild card teams, and I think that would mean it's in Miami. So I'm going to go with a nice no there.
All right, and then AFC, I'm assuming Tennessee. Is that a team you feel confident?
Tennessee is an easy matchup for the Ravens. Okay. I think they can get it going, especially, Calais Campbell didn't sound like it was supposed to be a super long-term situation. So I think that the Titans are pretty much everybody's looking at the Titans if they can get in.
Yeah, the AFC South is locked into that 4 seed in terms of the division winners. So we'll see Jacksonville making a little run, but we'll figure out what happens there. But Spencer, I appreciate you. That's all I have for you here today. Tell people what you're working on and where people can find your work also.
BaltimoreBeatdown.com. Find film work, article work there, as well as at Ravens4Dummies on Twitter with the number 4. Thank you so much. And make sure, go give Kevin 5 stars. Reward the man who gives you the best daily Ravens coverage. And I'll talk to you guys next week.
A big shout out to Spencer, as always, for hopping on, talking about this coaching staff. And again, it feels like something has to give with them. And again, not so much like a firing type deal. It feels like that has now passed after John Harbaugh's press conference, but they need to be better. The coaching staff, the players, everybody. It is a team game, but when the play calling was as it was in week 15 against Cleveland, you can't abandon your identity if you're the Ravens. So it falls on John Harbaugh, it falls on Greg Roman in that type of aspect, but also the players have to be better executing. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, they executed, right? They did their job. They averaged 10 yards a carry almost, 8 yards a carry almost, but the pass offense is just not where it needs to be right now. John Harbaugh talked about that. So hopefully the coaching staff can get their players on the right page and the coaching staff can get themselves on the right page as well moving forward. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Also follow along with us in audio form, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards. A reminder, we are daily here on Locked On Ravens, so 5 days a week. We got you covered Monday through Friday with updates, analysis, news, and more. But when we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.